I watched her signature appear on the divorce papers, and I said nothing about the retirement account she didn't know existed. The coffee maker hissed in the pre-dawn silence of our kitchen, the same kitchen where Linda had made breakfast for 23 years. I stood by the window, watching the January frost coat our neighbor's lawn, thinking about how patterns become prisons when you stop noticing them. My daughter Sarah was getting married in 6 months. June wedding, outdoor venue, the works. Linda had been planning it for 2 years, ever since Sarah got engaged. Binders full of vendor contracts, spreadsheets tracking RSVPs, fabric swatches taped to our dining room wall like evidence at a crime scene. I'd been writing checks the entire time. Never questioning, never hesitating. That's what fathers do, right? They pay for their daughters' dreams and smile while doing it. Dennis, did you transfer the deposit for the photographer? Linda called from upstairs, her voice carrying that edge it always had before 7 a.m. Yesterday, I called back. 5,000. Good. Sarah wants to meet for lunch today to go over the seating chart. You're coming. It wasn't a question. It never was. I poured my coffee and sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by wedding planning debris. My laptop sat open to my email, where a message from my financial advisor waited. Subject line, quarterly review retirement portfolio. I'd been putting off opening it for 3 days. 23 years of marriage. 18 years at the same engineering firm. A mortgage paid off last year. A daughter I'd do anything for. A retirement account that had grown steadily through careful planning and disciplined saving. Everything was exactly as it should be. Everything was suffocating me. The restaurant Sarah chose was the kind of place where they served $12 iced tea and called it artisanal. I arrived 10 minutes early, as always, and waited at a table by the window. Sarah showed up 20 minutes late with Linda, both of them laughing about something on Sarah's phone. They slid into their seats without apologizing, already deep in a conversation I wasn't part of. Dad, we need to talk about something, Sarah said, not looking up from her phone. I set down my water glass. What is it? Brandon and I have been talking. Brandon was her fiancé, a marketing executive with excellent hair and a firm handshake that felt rehearsed. We think it would be better if you didn't walk me down the aisle. The restaurant noise seemed to dim. I'm sorry. Brandon's father really wants to do it, Sarah continued, still scrolling. He's been so involved in the planning, and honestly, it would mean a lot to Brandon's family. They're paying for the rehearsal dinner and the honeymoon, so... I looked at Linda. She was studying her menu like it contained nuclear launch codes. Linda? I said quietly. She finally looked up. Dennis, you have to understand, the Mitchells are very traditional people. Brandon's father walked his other 2 daughters down the aisle. It's important to them. And what about what's important to me? Don't be dramatic, Linda said, that familiar ice creeping into her voice. You'll still be at the wedding. You'll still be her father. This is just logistics. Logistics. My daughter's wedding, the moment I'd been imagining since she was born, reduced to logistics. Sarah, I said, forcing myself to keep my voice level. Do you want your mother to walk you down the aisle instead? God, no. She laughed. That would look weird in the photos. I sat back in my chair, understanding washing over me like cold water. This wasn't about tradition or Brandon's father. This was about me not maturing enough to fight for. How much have I spent on this wedding so far? I asked. Linda's fork paused halfway to her mouth. That's not relevant. Humor me. Sarah finally looked up from her phone, annoyed. Dad, if you're going to make this about money. $47,000, I said quietly. The venue, the catering, the dress, the flowers, the photographer, the band. $47,000, and I don't get to walk my daughter down the aisle because it might inconvenience Brandon's family. See, this is why we didn't want to tell you, Sarah said to Linda, as if I wasn't sitting right there. Linda reached across the table, not to comfort me, but to pat Sarah's hand. Don't worry, sweetheart. Your father will come around. He always does. And there it was. The truth I'd been avoiding for years. I always came around. I always gave in. I always made myself smaller so they could be more comfortable. Excuse me, I said, standing up. I need to use the restroom. I walked out of the restaurant instead. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes, watching people come and go from the restaurant. My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from Linda. Where did you go? Don't embarrass us like this. Sarah is crying. You're being incredibly selfish. I turned off my phone. The drive home took 30 minutes through midday traffic. I used the time to think, really think, for the first time in months. When had I become this person? When had I stopped being a husband and father and become just a source of funding? At home, I went to my office and opened the email from my financial advisor. My retirement account, $847,000. Money I'd been saving since my 20s, carefully invested, never touched. Linda knew about it, vaguely, but she'd never asked for specifics. She had her own career, her own income, her own retirement savings. This was mine. I opened a new browser window and started searching. Divorce attorneys in the area. Mediators. Asset protection strategies. I bookmarked 17 different websites, reading carefully, taking notes in a password-protected document. Then I closed everything and went downstairs to make dinner. Linda came home at 8 p.m., slamming the door hard enough to rattle the pictures on the wall. What the hell was that today? She demanded, finding me in the kitchen. I was chopping vegetables for a stir-fry, the knife moving with steady, mechanical precision. I laughed, I said simply. You embarrassed Sarah on one of the most important days of her life. Having lunch to discuss seating charts is one of the most important days of her life? I didn't look up from the cutting board. You know what I mean. She's your daughter, Dennis. Yes, I said quietly. She is. Linda waited for me to say more, to apologize, to beg forgiveness like I always did. When I didn't, she made a disgusted sound and went upstairs. I finished making dinner. I ate alone at the kitchen table, reading articles about retirement account protection and divorce proceedings. The stir-fry was perfectly cooked. Over the next 3 months, I became a student of my own life. I discovered that Linda had been telling her book club I was difficult and controlling for the past year. I found this out by accident when one of the wives mentioned it at a neighborhood party, thinking I already knew. I learned that Sarah had been complaining to her friends that I was emotionally unavailable because I worked long hours. The same hours that paid for her apartment, her car, her wedding. I noticed that neither of them ever asked about my day, my work, my interests. Conversations happened around me, not with me. I was scenery in their lives, useful but not essential. The wedding planning continued. Linda still expected me to write checks, which I did without comment. The photographer, the flowers, the upgraded bar package, the string quartet. Every payment processed smoothly from my account to theirs. I attended the vendor meetings, nodded at the appropriate times, signed the contracts. I never mentioned the aisle conversation again. Linda and Sarah probably thought I'd gotten over it. I hadn't gotten over it. I'd gotten careful. Execution. In April, I scheduled a consultation with Margaret Chen, a divorce attorney whose credentials read like a war hero's resume. Her office occupied the corner suite of a downtown building with a view of the river. Mr. Harper, she said, shaking my hand with a grip that meant business. Tell me about your situation. I laid it out clinically. 23 years of marriage. 1 adult daughter. Assets acquired before and during marriage. A retirement account Linda had never shown interest in. A wife who treated me like a human ATM with the personality of furniture. Do you have documentation of the retirement account's growth? Margaret asked. I slid a folder across her desk. Quarterly statements going back to 5 years before we married. The account had $127,000 in it when we got married. Everything after that is marital property, but the original amount plus growth from those original funds should be protected. Margaret flipped through the documents, her expression neutral. This is unusually thorough preparation. I'm an engineer. Thorough is what I do. Most people come to me in crisis mode, not with color-coded spreadsheets. She looked up. How long have you been planning this? 3 months of active planning. Years of passive noticing. And the catalyst? I told her about the wedding, about being removed from walking Sarah down the aisle while still being expected to pay for everything. About 23 years of making myself smaller while Linda and Sarah grew more comfortable with my irrelevance. Margaret was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. Mr. Harper, I think we can do something that serves your interests while being completely fair to your wife. Washington is a community property state, but there are ways to protect premarital assets and their growth. Your documentation is excellent. How long will it take? To prepare? 2 weeks. To file? Whenever you're ready. Let's file the day after my daughter's wedding. Margaret's eyebrow rose. That's specific. I'll pay for her wedding. I'll show up. I'll play my part perfectly. And then I'll stop playing. You understand this will be difficult? Even with strong documentation? I've been living through difficult for years, I said. At least this difficult has an endpoint. Before I subscribe to the channel, I want you to know how this story ends. If you're enjoying this, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. We spent the next 2 weeks building my case. Every document organized, every asset cataloged, every timeline verified. Margaret was nothing if not meticulous. The wedding was set for June 15th. I marked the calendar, filed June 16th. Sarah's wedding day arrived with perfect weather, the kind of June afternoon that makes people believe in fairy tales. The venue was a restored barn in wine country, all exposed beams and string lights and Instagram-ready photo opportunities. I wore my best suit. I smiled for the photos. I wrote the final check to the venue coordinator without my hand shaking. Brandon's father walked Sarah down the aisle, beaming like he'd accomplished something. Sarah looked beautiful and happy and didn't once glance in my direction during the ceremony. Linda spent the reception networking with Brandon's family, laughing at their jokes, fitting seamlessly into their world in a way she'd apparently decided I couldn't. I danced with Sarah because tradition demanded it, even though I wasn't traditional enough to walk her down the aisle. She talked about the honeymoon in Bali, about the apartment she and Brandon were buying, about her promotion at work. She didn't ask about me once during our 3-minute dance. Thanks for everything, Dad, she said when the song ended, already looking over my shoulder at someone more interesting. You're welcome, I said. It was the last conversation we had that night. I left the reception at 9 p.m., citing an early morning meeting. Linda barely noticed. She was too busy laughing with Brandon's mother about something that required touching her arm repeatedly. At home, I changed into comfortable clothes and sat in my office, looking at the stack of documents Margaret had prepared. Everything was ready. Everything was in order. I thought about calling Linda, warning her, giving her one last chance to see me as something other than a walking checkbook. Instead, I went to bed and slept better than I had in months. Linda found the divorce papers on the kitchen table the morning of June 16th. I'd left them there before driving to work, along with a single-page note explaining that my attorney would be in touch and that she should contact her own representation. The phone call started at 7:43 a.m. I declined every one. The text messages came in waves. What the hell is this? You can't be serious. After everything I've done for you? Sarah's going to be devastated. You're having a midlife crisis. We can work this out. You're making a huge mistake. I read them all. I responded to none. By noon, Sarah had called 6 times. I let every call go to voicemail, then listened to her messages over lunch. Dad, what are you doing? Mom is losing it. You can't do this right after my wedding. What will people think? This is so selfish. Call me back right now. The evolution from confusion to anger took 3 messages. The final voicemail was just crying in disconnected words about how I'd ruined everything. I deleted them all and went back to work. Margaret called at 3 p.m. Your wife's attorney made contact. Richard Brennan, decent guy, plays golf at the same club as my husband. He wanted me to tell you that Linda is willing to negotiate if you drop this immediately. No, I said. He mentioned that this will damage your relationship with your daughter. That relationship has been damaged for years. I've just been too busy writing checks to notice. All right then. He'll have his counterfiling by end of week. This is officially in motion, Dennis. Good. The war lasted 4 months. Linda fought for half of everything, including the retirement account. Her attorney argued that my premarital savings had been enhanced by her domestic contributions, that she'd sacrificed her career advancement to support my work travel, that 23 years of partnership entitled her to equal division of all assets. Margaret dismantled every argument with the precision of a surgeon, using Linda's own social media posts against her. Photos of expensive vacations Linda had taken with friends while I worked. Check-ins at high-end restaurants on nights I'd been traveling for business. Posts about her successful career and independent life. The court saw what I'd been seeing for years. Linda hadn't sacrificed anything. She'd lived her life exactly as she wanted, with me as a convenient source of funding when needed and a source of complaints when not. In October, the judge awarded me full protection of my premarital retirement assets plus growth. The house would be sold and proceeds split. Other assets divided equitably. I walked away with $847,000 in retirement savings, half the house value, and freedom. Linda walked away with her half in an expression I'd never seen before, respect mixed with something that might have been regret. I moved into a downtown condo with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the river. 1 bedroom, 1 office, perfect for a man who'd spent years living in a house full of people who treated him like a ghost. Sarah didn't speak to me for 3 months after the divorce finalized. When she finally called, it was to tell me she was pregnant and that Linda thought it was best if I didn't visit until things settled down. Define settle down, I said. Dad, don't be difficult. I'm not being difficult, Sarah. I'm asking for clarity. When do things settle down enough for me to meet my grandchild? Silence on her end, then, I don't know. Mom says you're different now. Harder. No, I corrected gently. I'm the same person I've always been. You're just noticing me for the first time. That's not fair. Neither was removing me from walking you down the aisle at a wedding I paid for. But we don't always get what's fair, do we? She hung up. I wasn't surprised. 6 months later, she sent a photo of my grandson through text. No message, just the photo. He had Sarah's eyes and Brandon's nose, and neither of them had any idea what their rejection had cost them. I look at that photo sometimes, this child I may never meet, and wonder if he'll grow up hearing stories about his difficult grandfather who abandoned the family for selfish reasons. If Sarah will pass down Linda's version of events, where I'm the villain who destroyed everything. It doesn't change my decision. Some nights, I sit by my window and watch the river flow past downtown, carrying everything that doesn't belong toward the sea. I think about patterns in prisons, about how we build cages from our own willingness to be less than we are. Linda is dating someone now, according to mutual friends who feel compelled to update me. He's a retired doctor with a vacation home in Cabo. She posts about him constantly on social media, all smiles and couple photos and hashtags about second chances. I'm genuinely happy for her. She found someone who fits the life she wanted. Someone who doesn't need to be reduced to fit. My retirement account continues to grow. I'm planning a trip to New Zealand next spring, something Maria always wanted to do before she got sick. I'll scatter her ashes there, finally. 20 years overdue, but better late than never. Sarah may come around someday. She may not. I've accepted both possibilities. The one thing I know for certain is this: I will never again make myself smaller for someone else's comfort. I will never again accept scraps of attention while providing banquets of support. I paid for my daughter's wedding. I played my part. And then I stopped playing. If that makes me the villain in their story, so be it. In mine, I'm finally the protagonist.